Hello and welcome to the Zach Thinks Your podcast. Today's going to be a solo episode. This one is going to be a little bit of stream of consciousness. I have a couple notes here written down. Someone asked me recently, a guy was saying is this all my fault? Is me not holding the mental load for my partner completely my fault? Or is some of it there was conditioning? Do I have full control over this ship, or was I already sinking from the beginning? And one of the things I'm working on right now is with one of my editors is putting together my book proposal, and a huge part of this is going to be what shows up in one of those early chapters, both as a thought and creative exercise for myself to do a little bit of stream of consciousness here of answering to that question, as well as trying to answer that question. I wanted to make this episode sort of casually, with the aim of hitting on a handful of points that I think will really help, especially for women that are struggling to have a conversation with their partner about having this conversation of look, I need you to shift and see the mental load, but at the same time, I see where you're coming from. I see the conditioning. I see what you've learned over time. This is meant for having that conversation, giving you some talking points, helping to identify some of the dogma that we've kind of consumed over a long period of time, and some of the things that we can probably unlearn about it. So my personal opinion is that it's most of how we got here, I think, is not necessarily our fault. Sure, we've had a lot of choices along the way, but I think when we get to maybe even our early 20s, maybe in our first relationships, a lot of how we see, perceive, and approach relationships is very much what was modeled for us. So if we are hiding away from conflict, a huge part of that is based on what we experienced with our parents and how we saw them and what was modeled for us and the adults in our lives. And I think similarly, a lot of, I heard this recently, that the biggest lie anybody ever consumed was that adults have it all figured out, which I think I might agree it's one of the biggest lies, for sure. But I think one of the other biggest ones around emotions is sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. That is a huge lie. I think that when we think about hurt and the experience that humans have and the fact that they literally can't think straight when they feel hurt, it's such useless advice that I think probably everyone was given at some point. I think for sure men were given that. And I want to share a couple of the things that show up in our culture that I think really contribute to us men not having great role models, not having great mentorship, not having great modeling for us as who we ought to be as men, who we ought to be as husbands, as we ought to be as fathers. So the first thing that I think of is that I think so many guys, including myself, there's so many moments where I feel like I'm showing up. I am the dad. I am the guy that I feel like many other women would want as a partner. And as I've talked more about this over the past couple of years, I've found that I think more guys think this way than we think. And the problem is that we're all comparing ourselves to a really low bar. We're all comparing ourselves to Homer Simpson. We're all comparing ourselves to Ray Romano. Me as a millennial, born 1990, I grew up watching Seinfeld, Ray Romano, The Simpsons, Two and a Half Men. That's Alan Harper is the father in that one. I was a little young to really understand Full House, and seeing, I think it was Danny as the father figure. I know of the show, but I don't know it too well. Even looking at, I don't know a ton about Modern Family. I'm not a fan, but I've watched enough to kind of know the characters. But I think even Phil could be an example. So often what I hear are things it's not like I come home and ask for a beer. It's not like I come home and sit on the couch all day. It's not like I come home and play video games for hours on end. And it's interesting because I think I'm starting to slowly think that that is actually not the norm. That is a super below standard version of a guy that we saw modeled for us, that we saw in Homer Simpson, that we saw Ray and Everyone Loves Raymond weaponize incompetence, like actively pretend like he didn't know how to do something so that he was not held accountable for it anymore. Clipping my nail real quick because I keep biting it and it's bothering me. Thank you. So what we keep doing is we keep measuring ourselves up to these fake figures that were modeled for us. And who knows? I'm not necessarily a conspiracy theorist. I'm wondering if some of the writers of these things were thinking like, yeah, if we create, even the producers of these, like if we create these characters that are bumbling idiots that men will compare themselves to, all of us men don't have to work as hard because they'll think that that's the norm. And I think there's so many more men that like see themselves as better than those guys, to the point where it occurs to me, and I don't have enough quite evidence for this yet necessarily, but I think that there are more men that are above that bar, that's no longer a worthy bar for us to really compare ourselves to. Which brings me to a couple of the phrases that I've heard time and time again. What I want to point out is what I think is really trying to be said, and or like what's like the other side of the coin to these things. So I think one of my favorite ones, especially on mental load, is happy wife, happy life. So this was absolutely, I think we heard this in 2015, the year we got married. When I think about happy wife, happy life, the place that I start is at some point in time, we were saying, hey honey, what do you want for dinner? Like, happy to do anything. I'm willing to be flexible. Like, we'll have whatever you want. And there was that moment where she felt like, oh, that's so kind that he's letting me choose this. And then over time, what happens is there's so many decisions that she's making because we think happy wife, happy life. We will let her make the decisions to the point where we're almost learning helplessness around it, in that we now no longer think we can make decisions. We think that we have to. My cat's trying to get in. This cat is going to be the death of me. I just wanted a glass of water earlier. Alyssa's sleeping on the couch right now because my child has been grinding her teeth and is keeping her up at night. And I just wanted a glass of water because I'm trying to get this episode out so my editor can see it as we're working on the chapter 1. I wanted to get a bunch of ideas out. I swear to God, Georgie, where was I? So I think there's a lot of moments where it starts out as like, it feels like we're being a good guy. It feels like I am letting my partner make the decision. I want her to be happy. I want her to have her choice. And at some point, we're missing the part where it becomes a burden to have to choose. I think we're putting so many things in their palms, having them be so much of the decision maker, that at some point it's actually nice to not have to make the decision, even if it means you might not get exactly what you want. And so this happy wife, happy life syndrome, if you will, like, I think it's a slow and steady pacing for the women in our lives, owning the mental load, owning the decision making, and getting decision fatigued out around a lot of things. I think one of the next one kind of builds off that is, but I help out, is a lot of guys saying, I help out, like I am an actively engaged. I cringe so much at hearing when guys are saying, yeah, like I help all the time. It's like, no, what we want to be saying. Now, I'm a huge believer that language is super, super important. The huge chapter in the book is going to be just vocabulary and talking about emotional labor, talking about mental and cognitive labor, like fully arming ourselves with examples and language that we can articulate things really well. And when I hear men saying, yes, yeah, no, like I help out all the time, what that's saying by using the word help is, and I've seen, I think Jared Minton had this viral video back in fall 23. Fun fact, I just did like a green screen duet of it, and it got like auto posted onto YouTube. I made a couple $100 because that viral video also performed really well on YouTube, and I got credit for it. But he said, I don't help my wife with dishes. I don't help my wife with laundry. I don't help with the kids because I do what I need to do as a father. I cook, I clean, I wash dishes. And he just pointed out that, like, change the language, like when we stop using the word help, it totally shifts the way that we go about operating and the context with which our participation at home shows up. So when I say that I'm helping on something, that immediately puts me in a secondary ownership role. Doesn't put me as a co-owner, doesn't put me as a co-CEO or co-founder, puts me as, a manager or a worker, but not necessarily ownership. So whenever I hear help, I really aim to call that out. That is something that if I hear it on a call, I will call it out. If I hear that in talking with parents, if I have the time, or we're not just completely passing by each other, I'll say, "Oh, what do you mean you help?" And I'll call it out. I really aim to try to change the way that we talk by calling those kind of things out. Even reminds me of the other day, I think when my parents come over on Fridays, they're often seeing me on Zoom calls. I'm kind of in and out of the kitchen while they're over. And on last Friday, I was just moving some mulch that Alyssa had put into a pile. She's asking me to put into a wheelbarrow. My dad said, "Dad's doing some manly work." I was like, "Dad, what do you mean by manly?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, right." And he kind of took it as coaching of like, "Oh yeah, Zach's not going to let me say things that kind of represent maybe like a more old school mentality around masculinity." Which kind of brings me to one of my next ones that I hear so often is like that men, dads, fathers, husbands are protectors and providers. And this feels like just such outdated information. When I think about coming into our marriage, I had a thought around it as like, I'd be probably pretty happy being like a stay-at-home dad. Like, there's no ego of mine that would get in the way. Like, if Alyssa loved what she was doing and we were making enough and it was working out, like, I could be a stay-at-home dad. Like that, there's no existential crisis that shows up for me, which in that scenario, right, that wouldn't fit the traditional protector-provider role. However, I think if we were to evolve what we consider a provider, how we evolve what we consider a protector and provider, like, I think when people have historically thought about that, it's like the man of the household, wears his pants, is the one that if a intruder were to come in your home, they're the one that would beat them up. And like safety is such a much more rare occasion in our homes than I think any other time in history. And I would argue that so much more of what we're fighting these days is like emotional awareness and emotional health. When we look at our kids and our teenagers, like we're fighting against social media, we're fighting against like the hell they're learning in school, what the hell they're learning on the internet. And so much more of what it means to be a provider, I think, is so much more today than financial. I think historically providers meant provide, money in the bank account. But I think for women aren't looking for that kind of provider today. I think they're looking for the person that's going to provide emotional labor, that's going to provide an emotional safe space for them in a relationship as well as a parent, like being able to be a safe space for kids to share emotional things. So protector and provider, like historically, is probably finances and physical safety and protection. And when I see that today, protector and provider, it's like protector and provider of emotional awareness, emotional safe space, emotional growth, emotional literacy, protection against mental health illnesses like depression, like being the team captain, the morale booster, like maybe not keeping spirits high in like a toxic positivity way, but like in a way that is like keeping the family grounded and like moving towards the goalposts of whatever those goalposts are. Yeah, just like being a provider is just so much more than a paycheck these days. And it makes me so sad when I hear young men talk about like the dating expectations is that they're making six figures in their 20s. Like that's just so, it took me till I was after 30 for me to make six figures. I was a teacher for years. It makes me so sad hearing that a lot of men feel like that is the bar for them, is that they are a paycheck, and the expectation for them in the dating pool is that they earn that much. It makes me so sad. Which brings me to another thing that I really struggle in hearing, especially in the manosphere on the podcasts and things, is hearing men that want peace. I just want peace when I come home. Like I don't want to fight. I don't want to talk about emotions. I just want peace. And they really, what I think they're saying is, I want my partner to be an emotional safe space for me to come home and dump on them if I need to. Like if I've had a hard work day, and I remember talking with a colleague who was saying, I'm out here fighting proverbial slaying dragons. It's like, dude, we sell software, man. Like we're not slaying dragons out here. Yeah, it's like fun, and it's like, metaphorically fun to say like, yeah, making cold calls out here, like doing arguably challenging work. I get the challenge of it. I'm in the position with you, but coming home and wanting peace, it occurs to me, is what they want is emotional safety. They want emotional safe space to talk things through and feel like their partner has their back. The problem with this is that I just want peace. Like, so don't they. So doesn't fucking everybody wants peace. And when emotional labor isn't being done both ways, like, your wife is not your therapist. I think it's wonderful when both partners can be doing emotional labor for each other. I think Alyssa and I do that for each other pretty well. We'll say, hey, can I share something with you? Hey, can I regulate this? Hey, can I soundboard off you here? Like, I don't know if coaching's the right word, but we're bouncing things off each other constantly. And our home is not like a place of peace, but it is a place of emotional safety for sure. I want to say when I come home, but I am home. I work from home, so there's not a whole lot of coming home. It's when I'm coming home, it's usually because I'm picking up our toddler from preschool. When I hear that, I just want peace. I think another piece of it, it's saying that the emotions that our partners have, that when we quote come home to from our hard day at work, that they should already be regulated, and that their emotions are inappropriate, that they shouldn't have any worth sharing with us, such that we don't have peace, or like they can't just they should be able to just do emotional labor for us and us not have to do it for them. So that's kind of my take on what I think a lot of men actually mean when they say, I just want peace. And I think kind of going into another one that I hear a lot, which I think I fell into this quite a bit, was, I'm easy. Like, I'm easygoing, and like, she's just uptight, man. Like, I don't know what's gotten into her. Like, I don't know why she is that way. And I think this is a really akin to happy wife, happy life, where it's like, we think that it's the easy, the useful thing for us to not have a decision and to be easygoing and being fluid and flying by the seat of our pants. And I think going more into sort of, the experience of moms, is that when we are flying by the seat of our pants, when things are not planned out, I think a lot of times the brunt of that, like the issues that occur with that, very often fall on mom. Whether it's that she ends up having to do more planning, or she has to take on more decisions, or there's more challenges. Let's say, where am I going with this? I think it's another example of where men are thinking that because they're being easygoing, because they're not making decisions, and they're just being free flowing, and whatever decisions that are made, it'll better serve the family because I'm being open to options. They're just not seeing the heaviness of they're not seeing the heaviness of decision fatigue. So when I'm hearing that phrase, that I'm easygoing, she's the one that's uptight, I think that's like the huge missing piece of education there. It's very similar to like, she nags because she likes control. It's not necessarily that she nags because she likes control. I think she nags because she's the one that has the mental checkbox in her head. Oftentimes, especially if we're being delegated something, because we've said, yeah, I'll do that when I get to it. And then when they come back, hey, did you do that thing? Laura Danger talks about the nag paradox so well, which is that there's a lot of men that are declining to hold the mental load and say like, yep, I'll get that done by Saturday at 5. And then, when Saturday at 4:30 rolls around, they're not the ones coming and saying, hey, I know I said I was going to have it done by 5. I think there's a better chance like I'll finish by tomorrow if I have an extra 2 hours to work on it. Like, that kind of accountability, that's the kind of accountability that prevents nagging. That's the kind of ownership that prevents the person with the owning the conception of it having to come back and hold you accountable for it. The nag paradox is like, okay, you don't want me to nag you, but at the same time, you're not going to own the mental load. You're not going to own the thinking about it. So I have to nag you, but you're also going to get mad when I nag you. So it's like this purposeful box that it puts typically the mom in, is that she doesn't get what she wants. Like, she can't even ask for the things that she wants because she'll be put in this nag paradox of, okay, great, I get to ask for it, but you're going to get defensive if I were to hold you accountable to something you said you would do. So they'll hate the word nag, but like, if I were to rephrase, like, she holds you accountable because she wants you to be accountable. Like, if she's asking you to do something, it's not typically for, well, maybe it is for her health, but she's not asking you for the asking being part of her health, but she's asking because she wants something done. And you're probably, not snapping to it and seeing that this happens with me. There are plenty of things where I know that Alyssa has loneliness around feeling like she's the only one thinking about things, and that she will have to nip things in the bud or else I'm not going to do it. There's a huge reason why I promote the boring meeting, which, for those of you that have been following me for any time, you may have heard me talk about the boring meeting. Recently, it's been built into an acronym. So it's baseline, operations, repair, initiative, nurture, and game planning. Very excited that I came up with this acronym the other day. ChatGPT was great in helping me brainstorm the letters to fit into it. But this meeting that I coach my men to do, and I'll be certainly talking about in the book, help us kind of get ahead of those moments where we could be causing our partners to fall into the nag paradox, which kind of comes to a next one, which I think follows very closely again with these other two of, I'm easygoing, she's the one that's uptight, she nags because she likes control. And this next one's like, it's just not important to me. I don't see it. Like, when there's chores around the house, when there's things that are dirty, like when we're saying like, I just don't see it. I just walk right by and I don't notice it. I'm like, in those moments, what's actually happening is we're unwilling to have the things that our partners are talking about be an extension of who they are and how we see them and the value we put on their experience around it. So let's say, for example, I think there was something for a while. I did not tend to put the cushions back where Alyssa really liked them on the couch. 45-degree angles on the two corners. I know that sounds technical, but you guys know exactly what 45 degrees looks like. If you don't know the math of it, typically with like a blanket draped over the back, depending on which living situation we've been in. And there were definitely times when she would get really annoyed that I wouldn't do it. And I think there were moments where I was like, I just don't see it. But at some point when she's asked for that enough times, where she said like, hey, like, this is how you set up the couch. Like, I've showed you. Like, at some point, like, that is just negligence. That is, I don't think it's weaponized incompetence, because I don't think it's like purposefully manipulative. And it's like an unwillingness to see that when I do this act, it is also a gift to her. Yes, it's a gift to the house, but because it is not something necessarily that is important to me, it is not a necessity for living, having the pillows in the place that she really likes on the couch, but that it is something that she really likes, loves, and appreciates. She feels like there's completion to the house, to the couch when that happens. Like, it's something that takes less than 6 seconds walking by and doing. And that is where I think we miss in our relationships, is we're unwilling to do these things because we're unwilling to see the value and or the experience that our partners have when we do them. I made a little video earlier today talking about I wasn't talking much, but it was just me cleaning up a little bit of strawberry juice that was in our fridge, and I needed to get wiped, and I noticed it. I set up the camera on the back corner of the fridge. Actually, I had wiped it, and then I pretended like I was wiping it using the same cloth. And I just did a voiceover saying like, I don't understand. It only took you 15 seconds. I don't understand how you can be lonely about that. And I think that's a great example of men not seeing that there are so many check boxes that exist for a lot of women because the judgment falls on them very often from friends, from family, from culture. And those moments are examples of where they feel like they're the only one thinking about it. They feel like they're the only one checking that box off. It is their box to be checked and make sure that it gets checked off. Like if you asked your kid to do their chores, like you'd have to go back and check, depending on their age, you'd have to go back and check to see, did they do their chores? And so I think that's how she often feels. I think for a parent that has kids that just don't own their chores and she feels like she has to remind them, she has to be their source of accountability, like that gets really lonely. I think anyone that's managed people, when I was a classroom teacher, and I felt like I was the only one picking up stuff off the ground and none of the kids were doing it, and I did a poor job training them to do that, like that got lonely for sure. Looking at my notes here. So I think the final thing that I think these are a lot of like the cultural issues, like the cultural things that are happening that I think really set us up to lose. Sorry, hope you don't mind the ASMR. I think when we hear these things repeated enough and we start to believe them, we start to feel like they are truth, that the women in our lives are just asking for too much, and I don't think that they are. And so I wanted to offer a couple questions, inviting questions into, what is masculinity to us? And, I've noticed for myself when I typically end up trying to describe what I think masculinity is, I typically end up just kind of describing the same thing as what I think an adult is. It's rare that when I'm describing what masculinity is and when I'm describing adult is, like, they're pretty interchangeable for me. And so from there, I have been kind of working out what are the things that I see as really, really valuable for what I think. So, the working title of the book we're working on, and I think the shift in the way that I see, how am I trying to describe this? I'm trying to create a title that people are inspired by, that they want to become, and that they kind of have, there's values that kind of surround that. And I'm trying to think of an example of where this would exist. This isn't a great example at all, but pitch perfect. Like if someone's pitch perfect, I know that's a very specific skill, but I also think of they're good at harmonizing, they're good at singing, they can, they're great in an a cappella group. They have all these other skills and values around them. It's I'm trying to find a title that people can embrace, that they're like, yes, I am this thing, and these are the values that I hold by being this thing. I think a lot of people on the left side of the political spectrum really embrace the word woke. At some point, the right side rebranded woke almost as a negative term from their perspective. And I think, I would have considered myself woke for a long time, I think, until the right successfully somewhat rebranded the word woke into something that a lot of people feel negatively or ashamed about. Woke is not a great example either, but working dad is sort of that title that I'm working on. And within, working dad, I think some of the pillars that I look at around the word work, W-O-R-K, is willingness, ownership, responsibility, and knowing. So some of those kind of include willingness to consistently look at aiming for equality, parity, knowing that equality is the North Star, but that may not ever quite get reached, but the goal is long-term change. Either open to consistent feedback or creates opportunities for their partner to give feedback without being defensive. Willing to put down the problem-solving hat when the partner wants to co-regulate emotion. Willing to no longer avoid discomfort or conflict in uncomfortable conversations. Willing to acknowledge their privilege. Ownership takes ownership of lapses in meeting agreed expectations or out of integrities. Practices ownership of the mental and emotional labor of a variety of things, and is working on expanding that on a consistent basis. Takes ownership of emotional responses, trying to be more constructive than deconstructive. Taking on ownership of sharing emotions with improved fluency. Responsibility takes accountability for shortcomings, responsible for getting educated on the roles and responsibilities in their home, no matter the learning curve, equally responsible for the emotional labor of making a bid for connection after a conflict, and knowing that their partner has emotions that their own experience, which is not necessarily an attack on them, knowing that their family life is the most precious investment, doesn't necessarily see their job as inherently more important because it brings home money in a capitalist society, and that they're capable of making boundaries with their work to hold the values of the family as first. And that knowing that being a husband dad is more than a protector and a provider, and has sort of an evolved sense of what being a dad husband is. So being, a working dad, it's meant to be a bit of a play on the concept of a working mom, is that you don't really hear people say working dad, because dads just are working inherently, versus working mom. It's like, oh, well, she's a mom, but she's a working mom, right? She goes out and earns a paycheck too, versus our culture has told us that if you are a dad, therefore you pretty much earn a paycheck. There's no question to whether you're working, because you are. So kind of reversing what the working is the working is much more on emotions and relationship and valuing the needs of the family. I'm hoping for the couple that hears a lot of these things, that this was a useful conversation for you to combat some of the things you hear. What I'd love to hear, I'm told, at least on Spotify, that there's like a polling place. So if maybe I can put a poll on the end of this, is like what, I'm not really sure where you can receive comments. I'll tell you what, if you watch this whole thing and you have things you want to send me, like if there are other phrases that you hear that you would love to hear like a response to, send me an email. For some reason, I heard recently that my professional email wasn't working, so I'm getting dangerous here for the probably 100 to 500 of you that are going to watch this. If you have something you would like to directly discuss, actually, you know what? I'll simplify this. I'm going to leave a link to my free Skool community. All I ask is your email to join it. In there, if you DM me, I see all those DMs, versus Instagram, I get hundreds of them and I'm way behind, like I'm thousands behind. If you DM me in the Skool community, I will see it. There's a much better chance I'm going to see it from there. I would love to hear if there are other phrases that are showing up in your home, in your community, in your circles. I would love to hear what they are, because I want to be able to address as many of those ones that are consistently showing up. So hope this informs some of the conversations you're having, helps break past some of the dogma, some of the cultural training that I think we've all had. And I think the last thing I'll say to the guys that are listening is that all these things that you've heard, it is now up to you whether you're going to continue regurgitating them or not. It is now up to you whether you are going to stick with these things and practice the unlearning of these things, or if you're going to stay with it. Everything that I just talked about, we didn't necessarily have control over whether we were consuming them or not when we were sponges in our first probably 2 decades of life. We're now at the point where we have to take responsibility for how we deal with that from now. We've probably gone through traumas. We've probably gone through tons of conditioning from our community, from our parents, from our people. And now it's up to us, like, okay, are you going to do the untraining? Are you going to do the unlearning and the retraining? Or are you going to stick with easy street, which it's might be simple, but it might not be painless. I'm a big fan of, I'm trying to remember who the quoter was, but Tim Ferriss quoted at the end of his fear setting TED talk, saying that, just easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. And I think that a lot of the guys that are choosing these things to go through, these are easy choices to just stick with your culture. It's going to lead to a harder relationship. I can guarantee you that. Like, the women today are not the ones from the East that, like, this was how they saw things, I think, for the most part. If you do the hard choosing of, like, you know what, I'm going to unlearn these things, I'm going to work on these things, I'm going to put effort into shifting how I see things and own the cognitive labor in my home, it's a tough choice. It's going to be an easier life. It's going to be easier. It's going to be better. You're going to feel more fulfilled. I feel absolutely more fulfilled since I have been on this journey since 2021/2022. All right, I'm going to stop rambling here at the end. Thank y'all for listening. Lastly, again, if you made it all the way here, I would really love and appreciate if you hit the subscribe button on Spotify, if you're on Apple, hitting that. And if you want to give me an extra minute of your time, if you could leave a review, that would be absolutely huge. I'm enjoying podcasting. I have a lot of fun here. I love making friends. If you really like this solo episode, let me know in those reviews like that. Those mean the world to me. I know that your time is valuable, and taking the extra minute makes huge difference. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next episode.